Okay, everyone, if I can ask you all again to come back to your seats. So we do know, like I say, that everybody does want to make sure that there's lots of networking that happens, and there's going to be lots more time for that. So I'm going to start this session again in the same way like I did the last time. I'm going to ask the team to pull up Mentimeter, and I have another question for you. So this time, I'm just going to start off by reminding you of how you can get your questions and your comments in here. So you can go to menti.com, and at the top here you can see the code is 5231-2768. So 5231-2768. So if I could ask you all to please open up your phone and go to menti.com. Okay. I've started to get 6 answers into Menti, and I'm just going to wait there. We'll just see as well what else comes in here. Of course, as you know, we have, when I say we, Fair Seas Ireland have made a lot of effort to bring as many stakeholders into the room as possible, and included in that are the state agencies and also the relevant authorities as well. So that's why we're particularly asking this question. So I'll just do one last reminder. In order to get either involved in what we're doing here, and this of course is both online and in person, go to menti.com and use the code 5231-2768. And also that is how we're taking all the questions and the upvotes. Every question I ask, you hear me talking about that. Okay, we have 52 answers, and certainly it seems that you feel that the Irish government has the resources. So this again is a scale of between 1 and 5. A 2.5 is halfway there. So Irish government is at 3.2, state agencies is at 2.3, and relevant authorities is at 2. Okay, I am now going to move on to our next one, which is, this indeed it's a political question, but I think it's obviously in the context of all that we see around the world, it is important to see that. So I would be more likely to vote for a party or candidate that takes an interest in the health of our seas and our ocean. Okay. So you're mighty quick on the button there, 65, God, all right, and we're at a level of there 4.6. Now what I am, also you can see is the height of where this finishes will also tell me how many votes, so literally, how many votes are for something. So we can see that it slopes right up there, so 4.5 out of 5 there, okay, no real surprise. Now, this though is also really important, and I'm particularly interested in your answers for this, because we want to hear about this in preparation for the panel discussion afterwards. Many of the people who are going to be on that panel discussion about stakeholder engagement will then have time to see this. The panel, who I'm going to be introducing shortly, they've already had a chance to see and process what you've said around collaboration and also on transformational change. So how would you like to participate in the MPA process to come? Again, this is a word cloud. The bigger words are going to appear in a bigger font. Okay, and we are currently at 22. Take your time. It's we want to hear what you have to say. Okay, so I'm just going to start summarizing here for anybody, again, who might be tuning in online, or of course those in the room as well. So we have education, consultation, citizen science, community, in ad hoc working groups, face-to-face, community meetings, following connections, sustainable management, bottom-up approach, Valerie did point out that as well earlier, petitions, collaboration, online summary, contributing data, honesty, intergenerational, observer, honest, all of the above, online survey, local meetings, call Tim. Right, okay. We'll call Tim. We'll set up a WhatsApp group between the whole lot of us. Tim's our man. Outreach, offshore crossover, communal approach, reporting violations. Okay, 94 contributions. I will tell you, Donal particularly asked me to add this in here, and I think you've got a good run for your money there in that, Donal. We have one more question to ask before I then take you through into the next session, and that is this one. At what level would you like to participate? Is it local, is it national, or is it regional? And again, all of this, I'm particularly keen for our stakeholder panel to see. so that then they can see and get a sense of where we're at in the room. Okay. Clearly an appetite, and we did make this multi-optional, so you could choose however many you wanted. And I think the nuance in the conversation needs to be across all three, but in your case, right, so first of all, we're getting the most engagement here at national level at 70, regional less so, and local level 67. Now, they're all quite tight, I would say there. Okay, I will take that, and we currently have 100 interactions in there. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on. We can take off Menti. This again, anybody now, if you just leave Menti on your own phone, submit your questions. You can also see what's in there. I've taken off what has been answered. I do want to point out there was one question for Minister Noonan. He wasn't on that panel, that's why I didn't ask it, and I don't believe he's here at this stage. So that was the only reason that I didn't address that one. All of the others I'm getting through as I go along. Okay, so now just to explain the way in which this is going to work, we're going to start off with the keynote speaker this time. And after that, we are going to have a panel discussion, but we're going to run it like we did last time. We have 3 speakers. Each of them are going to stand up and give an 8-minute address. I will explain who each of those are. Then afterwards, I will do exactly like I did last time, bring everybody, including our keynote speaker, back on. We'll go through the questions as per how they're submitted through Menti. You've probably spotted my pattern. The ones that are upvoted the most are the ones that I get to first. But I do take a look at everything, particularly if there's anything you want to address to a certain person. And then after that, we will lead into another break. So what I'm now going to invite Eimear Manning. She is Youth and Climate Justice Development Officer, and particularly where Eimear focuses on is right at the centre of young people, climate justice, and also marine. So Eimear, floor is yours.
Thank you everybody so much for the opportunity to be with you all here today. I'm actually a little bit more nervous than I normally would be doing these presentations because my presentation has a little sprinkling of marine in there, but it's actually more about young people. So let me just make sure that this PowerPoint presentation works. Yes, perfect. So before I move on, my presentation today is on young people, climate justice and the marine. My name is Eimear Manning and I'm coming to you today from the National Youth Council of Ireland. Before I start, a quick personal note. I had throat surgery a few weeks ago and I'm still kind of in the recovery, so please forgive me if any strange noises or I need to stop to take a drink of water happens. You can laugh along with me, it's fine. So, I want to explain what I do. I am the Climate Justice Coordinator in the National Youth Council. And climate justice, we've heard a bit about it today, but for those of you who are kind of thinking, I've never heard that term before, what is that? It's the merging of 2 things. It looks at the environmental crisis and social justice issues and how they interact with one another. So climate justice is in the middle. I have a few very, very broad examples of climate justice here for you today. So just to give you kind of a quick definition. If there was a heat wave in Brazil, the people in the communities that live in the slums in Brazil who might not have access to reliable energy, who might not have cooling systems in their homes, and maybe don't have access to medical intervention if needed, are going to fare a lot worse in a heat wave than the rich people who can afford to live in luxury 5-star apartments on the Copacabana. So that's looking at how issues to do with the climate crisis can impact people with regards to poverty. Then we also have coal miners in China. So obviously we're trying to move away from using coal in our energy systems now. However, if we did a very rapid transition away from coal and we didn't take into account what's called a just transition or a fair transition, moving from something unenvironmentally friendly to environmentally friendly, if we don't take those workers into account, that transition is going to hurt their livelihoods much more than it is going to hurt the CEO of the World Coal Association. So here we have a huge discrepancy in terms of our solutions to climate change, being pulling away from coal, but also we're looking at education here and we're looking at wealth again. And finally, we're seeing, because of climate change and the climate crisis, a ton of migrations that are happening, both of species migrating into climates that can better suit them, but also of humans migrating to get away from, at the moment, it's mainly small island developing states where they're being flooded. But just to take this as an example, in this refugee camp in Jordan, and please, I'm sorry that I have to mention the war, but if a pandemic broke out in this refugee camp in Jordan, it would have much more devastating effects than it would on our communities in Europe that have well-educated, well-maintained medical facilities. So here, we're looking once again at climate justice and how it affects us in medical terms. One of the biggest advocates for climate justice in Ireland is our former president, Mary Robinson, and she says that advocating for climate justice safeguards the rights of the most vulnerable people and shares the burdens and benefits of climate change and its impacts equitably and fairly. And in response to this, the National Youth Council of Ireland were speaking with young people, as we always are, and we saw that there was a need within young people to do projects centered around climate justice. Many of them had done projects on biodiversity in their schools, things like planting wildflowers for bees, but they didn't really feel the depth within that, and they also didn't feel that human-centered approach to those projects. So NYCI created the Future Generations Climate Justice Project. It's a consortium project with the partners and funders that you can see on the screen. And I'm going to give you an example of one of the previous projects that young people did within this before I show you this year's. So one of the previous projects was the young people decided to write a climate justice charter. Now, we have been told, I haven't verified it yet, but we've been told that this is the first climate justice charter to be launched in Europe, which would be incredible, but we are still verifying that, but we do know that it is the first of its kind in Ireland. So the young people came up with 7 principles of climate justice that they want organizations and educational institutions to abide by and to sign up to. And if you are interested in downloading a copy or signing up to advocate for climate justice within your organization or institution, you can go to the website on the screen. The R went a little funny, but you know what it means. And feel free to also come up and chat to me later. But the reason why I'm here and talking to you today is that the Future Generations project is youth-led, which means the young people get to select the topic of interest that they have for that year. And this year, they have selected coastal communities. But this is a little bit different. We are teaming up with young people in Ireland who live in a coastal community, but do not consider themselves part of a coastal community. So we are going to work with them from now until the end of the year to gain ocean literacy skills and to foster ocean stewardship. They will be undertaking a local project of their choice, and their local projects will be based in Dublin, Cork, and Donegal. And it will be a marine-centred climate justice issue within their area. So they're currently at the point where they are identifying what those issues are. They'll be doing a 3-day residential in Galway in July and partnering with the Marine Institute, the Galway Atlantiquaria, and the Marine Explorers programme for that. This project will be partnered with young people and youth organisations in the Global South to share experiences and develop a sense of global citizenship. And this last point is where I'm actually kind of doing a call to action for you in the room. So we're going to be doing knowledge sessions, which is basically workshops and different things like seminars, Zoom calls. One of the examples would be to focus on the climate justice implications of expanding Ireland's MPA network. And we want to do this to upskill critical thinking on how these different policies might impact their livelihoods or their peers or communities' livelihoods. But at this residential in Galway, we're going to be sitting down with the young people and identifying what different areas of the marine they are most interested in. What do they want to end the project in December knowing? If any of you have resources, videos, activities for young people to do, if you do seminars or workshops, please do let me know, because what I want to do is bring all of these to the young people in Galway and allow them to basically pick and choose which ones they're interested in doing between now and December. But the end of my presentation is about why you should care about engaging young people as stakeholders. The first is that young people under 30 years old, this gets a little bit confusing for some people as well. In Europe, typically young people are considered 25 and younger, but there are some institutions of Europe that go up as high as 30, and in South Africa it goes up as high as 35. But young people under 30 make up almost a third of the global population. If we decided to cut out any cohort of the global population that made up to a third of the global population, if we decided to cut them out of policy making, there would be uproar. But because we can morally justify to ourselves that young people are less experienced, they're immature, they don't understand the issues that we're talking about, we somehow justify leaving them out of the conversation. The second thing is that young people are endlessly innovative. So they can see creativity within even a very serious concept. We don't like to admit it as adults, but when we get to a certain age, everything becomes very professional. And we get what I call professional blinkers, where we kind of have to funnel everything through this professionalism. Young people do not have that. They haven't developed it yet, which is a great thing. And they can come in and give you ideas that are totally outside of the box and maybe even outside of your comfort zone, but those ideas are really, really important to ensure that we're having engagement across the board. They are driven to act in a meaningful way. The amount of young people that I have worked with who have been invited to participate in a consultation or invited to give a speech or invited to do anything really, and then once that event is over, they're never contacted again. The amount of young people that I've had that experience with is stark. And to be honest, there's a sense of disillusionment from young people there when it comes to how meaningful their actions actually are. So if you ask young people, how can I make this experience meaningful for you? What does meaningful mean for you in this context? They will let you know, and they will work with you to build it. And finally, my favorite one, young people are refreshingly opinionated. And I mean that in a good way. Young people, if you come to them with an idea and they don't see the benefit in it for them, for their peers, their community, as long as you foster a space where they can be honest with you, they will be honest with you. And that refreshing honesty is really important, especially because the issues that we are talking about are urgent. So we don't have time to kind of wind our way through them. We need direct action that matters today. Young people are wonderful at facilitating that. Here are some of my favorite points to remember. Meaningful youth inclusion means both parties, you and the young people involved, both benefit. It's a symbiotic relationship. You both get something out of it. The second is that meaningful youth inclusion should be youth-centered, not youth-focused. It should not be you looking at young people and saying, I want something from you. It should be co-design, co-implementation. You are working directly with the young people to get what you both want from that experience. Invite people to the conversation that know nothing about your topic. This ensures that they are genuinely thinking about how those issues impact them and their communities because they haven't had time to research the broader picture. And similarly to this, if you do work with young people, but you keep inviting back the same young people all the time, that can also be detrimental to what you're trying to do. By not teaming up with the same people all the time, you also remove the risk of people telling you what you want to hear. Targeting young people is a no-no, but targeting young people is a must. This is paradoxical, but those quotation marks are really important. If you go into a strategy or an idea where you say, I'm going to target young people, and all you're looking at is age demographics, you've missed the mark. Young people are as broad as the rest of the population in terms of our opinions and our lived experiences. So we need to move away from this idea that young people are all like a monolithic audience that have the same ideas and the same experiences. A 14-year-old who lives in rural Ireland will have vastly different experiences than a 26-year-old who lives in an urban city. So we need to ensure that we bring all of those experiences into account. And my final slide, how dare we? Young people alive today and future generations that will follow are the cohort of the population that will have to live the longest amount of time through our decisions and our policies. How dare we not include them in the creation of those processes? We need to afford young people and other vulnerable communities agency over resources that will or could affect their lives. Nothing about us without us. This is a phrase that I have kind of stolen from the disabled community, who were annoyed at the fact that so many policies were being created for the disabled community without actually bringing people who were disabled to the table. So it applies in this case also. And finally, if you are interested in including young people but don't know where to start, please reach out to me. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and my email is also at the bottom of the screen there. I don't think we have time for questions now, but when I come back at the panel, I'll be very, very happy to answer any of your questions. But thank you so much for including me in order to include young people as well. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Eimear, and you certainly role model what somebody could do after throat surgery extremely well, I have to say. So the summary that I would have for that is that climate justice is not just about climate or about justice, but understanding the nuance between the CEO of a coal company and those responsible or whose industry really does drive how much they earn and what can happen then if something is changed considerably. Or indeed, as Eimear mentioned as well, if there's an issue in Brazil in a very hotly driven area or in an area where there's a lot of people very close to the water, that can be very close to different to what happens in Copacabana Beach. Also, you mentioned the Climate Justice Charter is potentially the first in Europe, but certainly the first of its kind in Ireland. And it was very interesting that the theme that the young people picked to work on is Ireland's coastal communities. But what really stood out to me was indeed a part of a community that they're not part of. Young people make up, and again being defined as under 30, make up a third or 31% of the global population. And if anybody has any resources or activities or anything like that to bring to Eimear for that initiative that's being run in Galway, please do reach out to her. And finally, meaningful inclusion needs to be symbiotic and invite people to the conversation who know nothing about the topic for that refreshing sense of diversity. And I think it's a striking phrase that she mentioned at the beginning, nothing about us without us. So we're now going to move to Joe Richards. And Joe Richards is from the Blue Marine Foundation, and Joe is the first of our speakers on this three-panel presentations first. Then we'll be bringing all three and Eimear back to have a conversation. And this session is called Delivering Transformational Change for MPA Management. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susan. Hello, everyone. I'm Joe. My name's Joe. I work for the marine conservation charity Blue Marine Foundation, and we're based in the UK. We work all across the world, and our aim is to restore the ocean to health. We've got several sort of core programs, and this is around creation and management of MPAs, restoration of key species and habitats, and supporting low-impact fishing. And today I'm going to talk to you about a little bit of our work working within MPAs and with low-impact fishermen and how they can coexist and benefit from them. Firstly, I wanted to talk a little bit about an overview of the UK, and this is where I base most of my work, and I do a lot of work in Scotland, and just have a look at the makeup of the MPAs there. And quite similarly, if we look at assessing it, we've only got 6% that are highly or fully protected, and the majority of the 371, I think that's increased a little bit now, are open to bottom-toed fishing. And this is just a quick map looking at the English MPAs. On the face of it, we're looking inshore, which is 0 to 12 nautical miles, and offshore, 12 to territorial waters. They're quite extensive, quite a lot there, but when we look at protection, this is in orange. This is all areas that are currently protected from mobile bottom-towed gear all year round. So there's not a huge amount. It's quite good, there's quite a bit in inshore waters. Scotland, I've spoken to quite a lot of people about Scotland. It looks great. We've got almost 37%, the government will quote, protected areas. But in actual fact, when we look at the protection here, particularly inshore, of that 12 nautical miles, there's hardly any yellow at all, or orange. So I've heard from a few speakers talking about quantity over quality. We've certainly got a lot of quantity, but not much quality in Scotland. There are a couple of areas here inshore, which I'll go into, which I do think there is a bit of quality, and hopefully we can learn something from that. But I also want to talk about other fishing methods within MPAs. And if we look at the makeup of the UK fishing fleet, the majority of our fisheries, our registered fishing boats, are small, under 10-metre vessels. And this is a similar number in Scotland, and the majority of those small-scale guys are fishing static gear. So it's really important to understand their fisheries, work with them, and manage those sustainably. And we have a strong belief that low-impact fishers should be involved in the development, implementation, and management of conservation initiatives, and most importantly, benefit from them. This is just a quick slide looking at a number of where we're working in MPAs. I'm going to focus on the two on the left, and these are areas that I believe where MPAs have worked or are managed well and are working well. The first one is on the west coast of Scotland, southwest of Scotland, Isle of Arran. And this is quite a remarkable story where 8 years ago, the first and still the only no-take zone in Scotland was established. Very small, it's only 2.3 kilometres squared. And this took 13 years of campaigning by local community group, Coast, the community of Arran Seabed Trust. And then they continued to campaign 4 years later, and they managed to get MPA that surrounded the no-take zone, which limited bottom-toed fishing and actually managed the levels of the other fishing methods. And unsurprisingly, these are some of the results that have been monitored over the last decade or so. We've seen recovery in most ecosystems, habitats and species, and some important species like king scallops have increased in the no-take zone, but also in the wider MPA, and we're starting to see increased number of lobsters outside of that, so fishers are likely benefiting from any spillover effect. If we look at on the Jurassic coast in the southwest of England, the government introduced a huge, actually, closure to mobile dredging and trawling. But this, however, actually, there was some unintended consequences of that. The local fishers came from outside, the number of crab and lobster fishermen increased, and they started to see a reduction in their catch. So this honeypot effect led to fishermen coming to speak to us, worried about their fishery, and we work with fishermen to establish the Lyme Bay Working Group. This is a collaboration between the local fishermen from the ports, government, regulators, and scientists, and it's really to develop sustainable models of fishing and conservation within their area. And this is a short animation just to reflect some of the results of that. So this has included over 12 years of research, over 25, hopefully the animation should come up, over 25 published scientific articles, and really the results speak for themselves. Similar story, the fishermen agreed to voluntary codes of conduct to reduce their effort, fish a certain number of pots. We've seen increase in vulnerable benthic species, increase in commercially important species, and the way that they're working together. If I just go to the next slide, if I just go back. So what have we learned from working with fisheries and fishermen? I think there's three key areas that we believe are important and works. One is research partnerships, and that's working to establish baselines, having that data to monitor change over time, and also inform better management. And this is one of the key areas of success in Lyme Bay, where the fishermen agreed to a potting study to reduce the number of pots, but also to monitor that so we could establish over a number of years what level is sustainable. And the results of that were that the lower level that they chose was sustainable, so they could continue to fish while the recovery of the environment and also catch valuable catch. We've heard a lot about today collaborative management. This I think, is absolutely key to any engagement and management of MPAs. And what we try to do when we start out is to speak to as many fishermen as we can, look at the problems, what's working, what's not working, and identify some common goals. A big part of this as well, I think, is facilitating dialogue between fishermen, between fishermen, government, and scientists, and communicating that science back to them. And all of this is around inclusive, collaborative development and making management measures that will sort of feed into regulation, Finally, other areas, and I think what's really important here is the fishermen have been able to prove that they are fishing sustainably. And this has led to So fishermen, we work with fishermen to benefit from conservation and demand a premium for their catch. So we've developed a reserve seafood brand with fishermen in Lyme Bay. There's a Jersey hand-dyed scallop brand. Help provide funds for chiller units so they can keep their catch as fresh as possible, demand the highest price, and work with them to get that catch to market. I just want to finish off with a little bit of work that we have developed. So we've developed a blueprint for MPAs, and this is based on our experiences from around the world. And it's really to provide a framework of questions and toolkit of ideas for anyone setting out in the process or partway through the journey of establishing MPAs or looking to manage MPAs. And this consists of a number of case studies. There's one around marketing seafood, stakeholder engagement. There's learnings, and it's set up so people can delve into certain areas that might be useful to them or where they are in their conservation journey. And it's hopefully there to help with that. So yeah, finally, I just want to finish with looking at sort of Ireland and where you guys are at in your journey. And I think, you know, you're in a great place. I agree with Donal. It's a good position, a good opportunity. You have a chance to influence the bill. There's going to be a new set of MPAs. You've got a chance to influence where they might be. And I think the Minister also mentioned, I think if you can get some wording in there around public participation, but also some wording in there about requirements to manage fisheries or the impact of fisheries, then you've got a good chance to manage, to get MPAs that work for people, nature and climate. I'll stop there with time. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Joe. And a couple of things I took out of that is there's currently, the first case study you showed us was one of 4 no-take zones in the UK, but this has then led to an increase of king scallops by 4 times. But then when you spoke about Lyme Bay, you said it's one of the few marine areas where bottom trawling has been completely removed. And then you went on to tell us about the learnings you took from that. Number 1, establish baselines. Number 2, collaborative management. And number 3, seafood market support. And at a practical level, you mentioned that is developing brands to market fish, also funds for ice boxes, chillers, and other really practical supports. You also pointed out that you have developed a blueprint for marine protected areas, and you mentioned whether that's Turkey or a range of the other case studies that have been up here, and you gave a cautionary note to Donal, but also to the Minister, to make sure that what needs to be factored into the legislation is requirements to take care of the fishing community along the way. So our next person, and of course, like Eimear, we also will have a chance to put some questions to Joe during the panel discussion. Now I'm going to invite Siobhan Vai, and she is from RSPB, and Tristan da Cunha. Siobhan, over to you.
Thank you very much. So my name's Siobhan, and I'm from the RSPB, which is an environmental charity in the UK. And I'm very privileged to be with you today to talk about Tristan da Cunha as a case study of an MPA. It's a long way away from here. It's in the South Atlantic. But I feel like some of the themes that have come out from their journey towards designating an MPA are very reflective of some of the themes that have been discussed so far today as well. So first of all, where is Tristan da Cunha? If you've not heard of it, it's the world's most remote inhabited island. It sits in the South Atlantic, about halfway between Cape Town in South Africa and South America, just off the mid-Atlantic ridge. Tristan da Cunha is the largest island of the set of northern islands, and that's the only island with a community on it, and there's about 240 people who live there. There are 2 other islands in the northern group, and there's also an island 300 kilometres south called Gough Island, which forms part of the archipelago. It's incredibly isolated, and there's no airport, so it's a 7-day boat journey to get there. So what is life on Tristan da Cunha like? Life on Tristan da Cunha is very similar to many other rural communities you find all over the globe. It's very much focused on fishing, farming, and family. So the main income to the island and to the community is their fishery. They have a sustainable rock lobster fishery that brings in about 70% of their overall economy. It's operated by a single company who also employs the community to fish and to process the lobster ready for export to many areas all over the globe. The island governance is a UK overseas territory, but it has an island council which makes all of the decisions and a chief islander as well. So Tristan's journey and the community's journey to an MPA started many years ago, it came to a head in 2020 when the Chief Islander and the Island Council announced that they would be designated a marine protection zone around 90% of their waters. This was a huge decision for the community and a very brave decision for the community, because the community, like many rural areas, was entirely dependent on the resources that come from the ocean. And through designating this MPZ, it took some options out of the bag for the future in terms of where their income could come from. But they were incredibly proud, and are still incredibly proud, to have designated their waters as an MPA. In terms of marine management, what does that actually look like? So this is a huge area in the middle of the Atlantic. So about 3 times the size of the UK, 91% of their EEZ is completely no-take. In addition to that, they have banned bottom trawling across the entirety of their waters. Around the islands, there is a sustainable fishing zone, and the activities that are allowed in this zone enable the community to live and to continue their lobster fishery and that main source of income. So the lobster fishery operates, and also sustainable fishing for the people's dinners. There's also additional sustainable fishing zones on the seamounts, so parts of the seamounts are also open to sustainable demersal longline fisheries as well. But there's a balance, so they've designated the majority as no-take, but enabling themselves to continue to reap the benefits and the resources from the oceans that they require for their day-to-day lives. There are also many management challenges. Tristan is a very small island, only 240 people. The Conservation and Fisheries departments are only five or six members of staff. They have very limited field days, and they only have small vessels to go out and do research and monitoring in them. So there's some challenges around there. There's challenges around enforcement. So this is a huge area to be able to protect. But fortunately, advances in technology mean that satellite surveillance is really, really enabling the enforcement of this area. There's lots of challenges around research in terms of getting something sent to Tristan takes 3 months quite often, and funding. And there's been lots of discussions today about funding as well. And this is one of their challenges too, is they have support from ourselves at the RSPB and many, many partners, Blue Nature Alliance, the UK government, but it's constantly having the funding to enable them to manage effectively this MPZ. One of the key challenges, I guess, is also ensuring that the MPZ brings community benefit. So ensuring that the MPZ is definitely bringing in, the local community isn't shouldering the burden of that, but it's bringing benefit to the community through different revenue streams, through jobs, through any of those things that are bringing benefit to the community. The Tristan government started thinking about kind of what help they needed even before we got to designation. Designation was the first step in the journey for the Tristan community and Tristan government. So they were very aware of the challenges and spoke to many partners from ourselves at RSPB through to National Geographic, many others, about some of the, what they would need to make this a success. So firstly, around building capacity, so the RSPB and the project that I manage is looking at, well, how can we increase training and upskill people on the island, open the doors to global networks of experts for them and make sure that they have the support they need to make the MPZ a success, but also support the future conservation leaders as well on Tristan. So support the young people coming through who are going to be taking this into the future. Supporting research and monitoring, so connecting the conservation and fisheries departments with collaborators from across the globe. But one of the key things is around community engagement. So coming back to that community-led approach, the MPZ was led by the community, and it's crucial that the community is engaged and is proud of that MPZ. So a lot of the work that the project I manage doing is about building understanding of the MPZ benefits and ensuring that every member of that community, from the youngest child up to the older generation, is getting some benefit from that MPA. And then another thing is about raising the global profile. So making sure people know where Tristan is, building support for Tristan from across the globe, to bring in funding, to bring in investment, to bring in expertise, so that they are supported as much as they can to take the MPZ forward. So I'm going to finish up with just chatting about some of the lessons learned. So I guess my main message from my experience of working with the Tristan community and government is that this is a community-led approach. The community had the power and the control, and as such, that has led not only the designation of amazingly large MPZ, completely no take, but it means that it's also likely to last into the future. By having that community-led approach and the community driving it, it's built legacy into that MPA, and it means that everybody's invested. Having a more holistic approach to management and evidence, and adaptability and flexibility and support. So those of us in the audience who are, will be supporting those who are managing and leading, hopefully, MPAs in Ireland going into the future, making sure that support is really, adaptable and flexible and is supporting in the best way and the way that is needed. So I'm going to finish there and just say thank you very much and leave you some lovely pictures of Tristan. So.
Thank you very much indeed, Siobhan. So what I took out of that is Tristan is focused on fishing, farming and family. And I thought there was a lovely quote here which says, "The sea is our vital resource for our economy and ultimately for our long-term survival." The Marine Protection Zone is almost 3 times UK's safeguarding marine life. And you picked out the management challenges are capacity, enforcement, logistics, funding and enabling community benefit. But to overcome that, then there was a focus on building capacity through learning and development, research and monitoring, community engagement, and also raising the global profile. And particularly the 3 lessons that was learned from that is that it needs to be a community-led approach, a holistic approach, and an adaptability and flexibility in support. So now I'm going to bring on our final speaker for this particular session arrangement. And here we have Adrian Gahan, and he is coming from National Geographic. Adrian, over to you.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation to speak. Rather than me telling you what we do at National Geographic Pristine Seas, I thought it would be best to do what National Geographic does best, which is to show you a short film. So I'm just going to show you a 3-minute and 40-second movie about what we do at Pristine Seas. Thank you.
We are defined by the environments that we live in. It's our life. The ocean is our life.
It's not only an issue of economic, it's really about emotions.
This is one of these rare places on Earth where we can see the ocean of the past.
Miren hacia el mar y se miren las personas, porque si no hay recursos, no hay vida.
Lento, pero empezó la pesca comercial. Había una capturas masivas que aquí ya no era suficiente para vivir.
This species could go extinct in my lifetime.
The big fish are gone. They have been fished out.
As a global community, we need to decide what's the value of the ocean.
People protect what they love, and they love what they understand, which is where we fit in.
The moment I set my eyes on these places, I know why we're here.
Conservation needs to be based on a sound understanding of how these ecosystems work, whether it's traditional knowledge or contemporary science.
These remote camera systems give us a complete picture of the life in the waters from the near shore to the deepest ocean depths.
Es muy importante trabajar con los pueblos originarios y las comunidades locales porque han sido los verdaderos custodios de los lugares más frágiles del planeta.
Y si unimos podemos hacer tal potencia que no la va a poder derribar nadie.
They're our young leaders. We have to empower them with the passion to conserve the ocean.
I will work to declare Palau's waters closed to commercial fishing.
2 nuevos parques y o áreas marinas protegidas.
Y se constituye en un líder mundial en la conservación marina.
For us to remain this way for the future and for our young people, we have to ensure we help preserve our environment.
The answer is not coming from outside, it's going to be within.
Seeing the planet as it used to be, see the ocean as it should be, and try to bring it back.
So you can see from that short film that we've been very privileged to work with a wide variety of communities and governments around the world to assist in the designation of marine protected areas. So Pristine Seas was absolutely delighted when we heard that Ireland had made a commitment to protect 30% of its marine area by 2030. So what I'd like to do is take just 2 case studies of examples, very different examples, but 2 very successful MPAs. And I hope that these case studies will show stakeholders here in Ireland, be they fishermen or government or NGOs or coastal communities, that they've nothing to fear and a huge amount to gain from marine protected areas. So the first example I want to talk to you about is called Cabo Pulmo in Mexico. This place was desperately overfished. It's just at the bottom of the Baja Peninsula on the Pacific side of Mexico. And it was desperately overfished in the 70s, 80s, and by the mid-90s, really the fishermen were just competing to catch the last remaining fish. So to their great credit, they got together as a community and they approached the Mexican government and they asked if they could be supported in establishing a no-take marine area. It's not very large. It's 27 square miles, so about 70 square kilometers. And it was established in 1995. It took a few years, but this is 1999. This was 10 years later. It had really, really bounced back. Today, more than 20 years after it's been established, there's 500% more biomass of fish within this no-take MPA than there is in adjacent fished areas. It includes the beautiful top predators, the groupers, the sharks. They've come back tenfold to what they were like before the MPA was established. And it's created a wonderful thing, which we've heard mentioned already, called the spillover effect, where the eggs, the larvae, the fish that are allowed when the fish are allowed to become sexually mature within the MPA, there's a spillover. And the fishermen now are catching more fish than they ever did before outside of the closed area. And in addition to that, their wider community has benefited enormously. It's a huge diving center, lots of tourism, lots of restaurants, lots of hotels, B&Bs, and so on. So the stakeholder group has widened and many, many people have benefited. It's been a great success story. So just to take that, and then the very other end of the scale, an absolutely enormous MPA, because not all marine protected areas can be so close to tourism and so close to markets. So another one to mention is actually the largest no-take MPA in the world off Hawaii, which I know Mark mentioned in his remarks earlier. It's called Papuahanaumakiakea, which has taken me a while to learn how to pronounce, but it's a wonderful indigenous name for an incredible place. And Mark was right to say that it was established by George W. Bush, but it was actually quadrupled in size by President Obama in 2016 to 2.7 million square kilometers. So the first MPA is 27 square kilometers. This one is 2.7 million square kilometers, so enormously different in their scale. And at the time that Obama wanted to quadruple the size, the industrial tuna fishing interests in Hawaii very strongly objected. They said it would reduce their catch. They said it would increase their prices. It said they would push up the price of fish and damage the consumers. But importantly, the locals, the indigenous community, the indigenous Hawaiians were very much in favor of it. And that gave the Obama administration the confidence to proceed. And last year, a very significant study was published which showed that between 2016 and 2019, so only 4 years, the yellowfin tuna catch in the spillover increased by more than 50%. 54% it went up by. Absolutely extraordinary. So the tuna industry have done extremely well out of this MPA, and they've little to fear. In fact, as an aside, one of the co-authors of that paper is an Irish economist at the University of Hawaii, John Lynham. So I would encourage the Irish government or any Irish stakeholders that want to know more about this amazing case study, there's a very good Irish involvement in that analysis. So, what's the lesson of Papuana Makayakea? There are many lessons. One is don't only listen to industry lobbyists. Obviously, commercial interests are important, but they're not the only stakeholders when it comes to the ocean. There are many other stakeholders, including local communities. And secondly, it's clear in both these case studies and many more that strict protection works for nature and for the economy. So I'm just going to go back because of I'm afraid, the order of these slides. I'll just show you this. So this is a meta-study done by the founder and director of Pristine Seas program, Dr. Enrique Sala. And in this meta-study, they took data from MPAs all over the world. And the meta-study showed that there was, on aggregate, 6 times more fish in fully protected areas than in partially protected areas. So weaker benefits, or weaker protections means weaker benefits. So what does this mean for Ireland? I think the case study for Ireland is clear, which is Ireland is on the cusp of a great opportunity, but we need to be careful not to miss the opportunity. So this MPA legislation that's been mentioned is going to come back in its next iteration before the Dáil rises for summer recess. So we will see the next version of it by mid-July. And I would urge you all to look out for specific reference to 10% must be strictly protected. And by strictly, which is already an EU level, the EU biodiversity strategy, which Ireland agrees to, already aspires to a 10% strict protection across EU waters. So we need to see that commitment to 10% strict protection in the Irish MPA legislation. And what about the other 20%, which will make up our 30 by 30? Well, that 20% must also be highly protected. Not necessarily fully protected, but at least highly protected. And that should mean that there should be no industrial fishing in that other 20%. And that means no trawling. It is an oxymoron to suggest that you could have artisanal or low-impact trawling. Trawling, by definition, is a high-impact industrial activity. There should be no trawling in any MPAs in Ireland. So I would urge you all to keep your eyes peeled for this legislation when it appears next month. And if it doesn't have references to that ambition for the 10% strictly and the 20% high ambition, then I would urge you all to get in touch with the minister, get in touch with your local TDs, and make sure that they hear that there are more stakeholders involved in this than just large industry associations, that there are coastal communities, there are divers, there are recreational fishermen, there's the hospitality industry, the tourism industry, so many stakeholders that want to see this done properly. It's a wonderful opportunity for Ireland, and we, Pristine Seas, we would love to support Ireland in achieving this ambitious goal. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. And I will summarise what Adrian has said. Before I do that, can I just ask Eimear, Joe, Siobhan and Adrian to all rejoin me back up here on stage. I'm going to sit over here. And while you're joining me, what I'll do is I'll just share the summary of that. So a couple of things came out of the video. Without the ocean, we don't have life. A question was posed, what is the value of the ocean? And that they also showed technology giving a complete picture of life underwater. I don't know whether you picked it up or not, but I felt certainly at the end of the video, there was a sound almost of a beating heart, and I'm sure that wasn't accidental. Also, the case study put forward was Cabo Pulmo in Mexico, and Adrian pointed out the difference of what happened between 1999 and 2009 and quantified it with more than 500% of biomass increase in fish. Do you want, if you want to walk ahead. Also, he spoke about the expanded marine protections. I haven't a hope of, if you were to practice getting, Hawaii is great, yes. And that it went on to benefit the Hawaii tuna fishery industry. It started under the Bush administration, was quadrupled under Obama, and then also, you mentioned the commercial interests are important, but so too are other stakeholders. And two last points, weak MPAs will not deliver real benefits for nature or the economy, and the next 6 months are key to success in 3030. So what I'm going to do is I am going to now pose your questions, of which there have been many. But before I do that, I am going to ask you please instead to take a look at the screens both sides as we have a message from Al Gore.
Hello, I'm very happy to be able to speak to you today on World Ocean Day because we are at an important inflection point in our fight against the twin crises, the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis. Indeed, both of these crises are inextricably linked to one another. We not only need to solve the climate crisis in order to protect nature, we have to protect nature in order to solve the climate crisis. As global temperatures continue to increase, the impacts of those higher temperatures in the ocean, on the ocean itself, including its marine wildlife and the people that depend on the oceans, underscore our urgent need to act in ways that will effectively protect the ocean. After all, every day we're continuing to pump 162 million tons of global warming pollution, the greenhouse gas emissions, into the atmosphere as if the atmosphere was an open sewer. Look at this image behind me here. That thin blue line is the thin oxygen-rich shell of air surrounding our planet. It's blue because the oxygen refracts blue in the light spectrum. And if you went to the top of that blue line, it would take you only about 5 to 7 minutes if you could drive a car straight up in the air to the top of that line. And you couldn't breathe anymore if you got higher than that without oxygen equipment. But at the top of that blue line, all of the global warming pollution is below you. And it lingers there, an average of about 100 years per molecule, and it traps heat. And the amount of extra heat trapped by the accumulated global warming pollution in the sky right now is equal to the heat that would be released by the explosion of 600,000 first-generation atomic bombs exploding on the Earth every single day. Now, where does that heat go? Well, we feel it ourselves, but ultimately, 93% of that extra heat that we're trapping goes into the ocean. And that extra heat is disrupting the ocean patterns that we depend upon, migratory patterns. It's causing mass coral bleaching events. It's fueling much stronger deadly storms, filling up much larger atmospheric rivers with the extra evaporation of water vapor into the sky. And when those atmospheric rivers come over the land, we get these rain bombs and the flooding and mudslides. And of course, it's happening all over the world. Every night on the TV news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. Now, it brings me to Ireland. With 10 times more of your national territory at sea surrounding Ireland than the territory you actually have on the land itself, obviously Ireland has an outsized need to protect and steward the health of your surrounding waters. The commitment Ireland has made to protect 30% of its waters by 2030 mirrors Ireland's outstanding leadership on environmental protection and in the efforts to solve the climate crisis. But now's the time to transform the words and pledges and promises into meaningful action. And now's the time, because we're in the midst of the most decisive decade ever facing humanity. The actions we take now will determine whether or not we're going to leave our children and grandchildren with a livable future, and whether we can preserve the lives of the millions of species that are at risk and that actually help support our planet's thriving. Well, last December, world leaders recognized this urgency when they all gathered in Montreal and made a commitment to a global goal of protecting 30% of both land and sea by 2030. Ireland was a true champion for this agreement and now has the opportunity to lead the way in turning this ambitious goal into a global reality. Very exciting prospect. And of course, the seas surrounding Ireland have helped to sustain the Irish people for thousands of years. But in order for them to continue supporting the Irish people, these seas need to not only be protected, but also managed in a sustainable way. With collaborative policymaking that provides clear guidelines for marine protected areas, these unique ecosystems can continue to thrive alongside the people and the businesses that depend on them. And so I encourage anyone who cares about the ocean, the climate crisis, and the future of our planet to speak out and make your voices heard. Now is the time. And at times, political will on these issues can feel difficult to muster. Believe me, I know. But always remember this important truth. Political will is itself a renewable resource, and no people are better able to renew it than the people of Ireland. Thank you.
So, political will is a renewable resource. And on that note, I'm going to simply, with the short amount of time that I have, I'm going to start asking the questions here. So the first one, this is 20 upvotes. Joe, I might start with you on this. What are the panel's views? So I'm Joe representing the panel. What is your view on coexistence of MPAs and offshore renewable energy projects?
It's a good question, and I think it's dependent on, the requirement of the MPA and whether or not offshore wind would be compatible. But actually, there's a lot of thought and thinking around, could offshore wind or renewable projects at sea act as de facto marine protected areas because they won't allow certain types of destructive fishing or the less damaging stuff. So I think there's a lot of potential there and to explore not only, can it stop certain activities, but what are the ecological enhancement opportunities within those offshore sites, and how can those developers help work with that to achieve that. So I don't know if that answers the question. I don't think they can work with their MPAs, but I think they can play a part to the protected system.
So what's important is considering everyone's views and seeing how to share the ocean relatively equitably. Is that where you're coming from this?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And yeah.
Oh, okay. Eimear, I'm going to go to you next now. I'm particularly picking this one. Sorry, it's just changed there now on me because someone has voted on another element here and I have to find it. Yes, I have it now. This one, it hasn't been as popular a question, Eimear, but I'm asking you because you're the best person to ask. And that is 6 upvotes. Is the idea of considering future generations in how we care for our environment gaining traction globally, do you think? 6 upvotes.
It depends where you're looking. In democratic member states, yes, it is becoming more popular. For example, if you look at Wales, Wales have now officially elected a commissioner of future generations, which is incredible, and they will oversee the implementation of youth-led, youth-friendly and youth-inclusive policies across Wales. Ireland is actually trying to follow suit in that. So there is a lot of trying, and this is new territory for a lot of member states, so the progress is unfortunately slower than we would like it to be, but we are starting to see a shift in the mindset that young people are stakeholders in this, especially because young people have kind of identified themselves as the forerunners for the climate crisis in terms of activism. So the shift is there, it's just a little bit slower than we would like.
But is it like throwing sandbags into a river? Do you think, will that have an iceberg moment?
I think it will, and I think it's coming. I think that a lot of politicians are kind of realizing that when you have a cohort of people, a cohort of the population that is so incredibly passionate about a particular issue, it makes more sense for governments to bring those voices into the conversation, because it will not only help the governments and the policymakers, but it will also help the young people. So give and take in that conversation.
And of course, they're very empowered with a voice through social media and other means of conveying that point as well. Siobhan, can I ask you this question? So this is currently the most popular one on my screen here, 14 upvotes. Why are MPAs, you're very active, I can tell you here, very active. Why are MPAs not on any navigable maps? How then would fishermen, etc., know where and when, how to use that area?
I believe
where and how, apologies, where and how.
Okay. I believe in some areas they are on maps, so it depends where you look. But for example, on Tristan, along with the Marine Protection Zone and the Sustainable Management Zone, they also have an area to be avoided, which is a navigational protection, basically. So one of their biggest environmental disasters came from a ship passing too close and wrecking in 2011 and bringing in invasive species and pollution. And so as part of the marine management measures they brought in at the same time as the MPZ, they also brought in this areas to be avoided. So there's clever ways as well to kind of I guess, bring them onto those navigational maps and to put those additional protections in place.
So there is best practice to look at there and learn.
There's examples there to look at, yeah.
Okay, Adrian, I'm going to ask you this question now. This has a different connotation to the way in which I can put it to you. I'll read it out first and then I'll ask you the way in which I'm going to paraphrase. Have areas been selected yet for consideration as strictly protected areas, target of 10%? If yes, where are they? If no, what is the projected timeline for selection and protection? I would imagine that that is being asked very much in the Irish context. I'm not assuming, of course, I know you're not living in Ireland, so I'm not going to ask you that question directly, but what I am going to ask is, what sort of principles should be considered around selecting the areas and where they might be, and if they're not selected, what is projected timelines for selection and protection? So what can you teach us about somebody who's asking, and this is 11 upvotes?
Sure. So, well, I'm happy to say that Fair Seas has already done excellent work on this. They produced a really comprehensive report that identified 16 areas of interest across the Irish territorial waters. 8 of them are coastal, 8 of them are pelagic, which means offshore, that they don't touch the coast. And they were selected on a variety of criteria that included biodiversity significance for both marine creatures and migratory birds, but also as spawning grounds and breeding grounds, feeding grounds for commercially significant species. So that very important study should form the basis of identifying where the protected areas could be located. But of course, from that, they need to engage, Ireland, we all need to engage in a process of stakeholder engagement to make sure that communities are involved and understand the process, so that it's not top down, but very much bottom up, and people feel that they have agency over the process. And through that, the 10% that should be no-take, fully protected areas should identify themselves. I think it could be some ambitious coastal areas, but also some offshore pelagic sites. And then your other 20% will also fall out of that process.
Joe, I want to build on that because there's a question here directed at you, and it has been upvoted 13 times. Joe, are community-driven MPAs more successful than top-down-led approaches to designation? And I'm sure, Siobhan, you're going to have some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I think the answer to that is a combination of both. That's something we try to do, bottom up, but also top down. I think you do need both, but starting with bottom up, you need to understand where to, speak to the people of the area, speak to the users. What would they like to see? Ultimately, they know the marine environment the best. But I do also think you do need that top-down approach. So, but following, so bottom-up approach first, then followed by top-down, so then it can be implemented in legislation.
In parallel or in series, should they happen together or should one happen before the other?
It's a good question. I think if you almost need the levers there within the legislation to have that, to implement that. But then you need to have, I think, through the public process, the engagement needs to come first, and then the top-down instigation of that legislation, so enforcement of that. But without that, if you don't have the top-down, it's very difficult. If you've just got a community-led, voluntary approach, which can work well when you have engaged stakeholders, if you don't have, ultimately, I think what we realised from working in Lyme Bay is the voluntary codes work well, but ultimately, if you don't have that statutory or top-down designation, then the users aren't often treated as fairly. So you always have some user that won't want to apply with the voluntary code, and if you do have the ability to make that statutory, then I think it's a fairer process.
Do you want to add to that, Siobhan?
I would just add and build on that it's not just the engagement of the community. So the reason Tristan's MPZ has worked well is because the community has power and knows they have power and they have agency, and as such they're bought into that process. So it's not just about speaking to people, engagement. They have to feel like they are having an impact on that discussion and that decision. And I think that's crucial, giving them the agency as well. So.
Yeah.
I want to come back to a point that you made, Adrian. And I also want to draw on the strand there of the agency. This has been upvoted 13 times. It's directed at you. Adrian, do you see offshore renewable energy projects as compatible with 10% strict protection MPAs?
No.
Well, you could elaborate.
Well, strictly protected means no industrial activity. And whilst obviously Ireland meeting its renewable energy targets is absolutely essential, it is self-evident that would we allow a massive a wind farm to be built in the middle of the Killarney National Park? I think we probably wouldn't. I think the public would understand that that would not be in keeping with the concept of the national park. So if an area is to be strictly protected, then there should not be industrial fishing and there should not be industrial development. Now, and my opinion is that beyond the strict protection, there's certainly a role for renewable energy development in other types of MPAs, but not in strict protection, no.
Okay, so as I have to bring our conversation to a close again, so I'd just like to go through, ask each of you, what is your call to action? I mean, the title of our conversation today is Delivering Transformational Change for MPA Management. So in order to make that, or deliver that transformational change, what is your call to action to everybody? And Joe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, if you do everything you possibly can to try to get certain requirements into the bill and requirements on government in terms of public participation, but more importantly, the requirement to assess and manage fisheries impact. I think if you do that and you can get that in the bill, then there's accountability. So if you do, once the MPA network in Ireland is designated and certain activities of fishing pressures are being allowed, you can go back and say, no, there's a requirement to assess the effect they're having on there, and that actually it's not compatible. So do everything you can to get the requirement to assess and monitor fishing impact within the MPA network.
Okay, Siobhan?
I think bringing the local communities into the discussion at the very beginning, and not just bringing them in as an engagement or consultation, but give them agency to have an impact on that decision, and particularly build that throughout. The designation is just one stage. It goes beyond that. So building that into the younger generation and building the conservation leaders of the future and taking it through all the way through to build that stewardship.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to bolster what you just said as well, but I want to add to it too. For those of us who were at the reception yesterday, we heard MEP Grace O'Sullivan say that whenever she was speaking with local politicians and trying to inform them about the marine and about climate change, that she felt more like an educator. And I've had that experience as well. But I just wanted to mention that I think we should all start bringing the human lens into the conversation more, and how what we do is actually going to impact the real lived experiences of people. So if you are in a position to do that, please do bring in the climate justice lens into the conversation.
Okay, and Adrian?
To my mind, the most transformational thing would be for every TD in Ireland to know that their constituents care about this. So we've seen this issue with the nature restoration law where the lobby group that shouts the loudest gets the attention and the wider community's voice is not heard. So I think we should try to get to a campaigning position in Ireland where when this MPA bill reappears and before it becomes law by the end of the year, every single TD in every single constituency in Ireland should know that there are dozens and dozens of their voting constituents that care about this issue and want to see this opportunity taken and not squandered.
Okay. Well, on that note, can I ask you all to put your hands together for Adrian, for Eimear, for Siobhan and for Joan?